Hello everyone, this is Joe from Scarecrow Joe's Studio, and if you're returning to the channel as a subscriber, welcome back. And if you're new to the channel, welcome, and please consider subscribing. In this tutorial, we will be making a Jack Skellington themed jack-o'-lantern. So let's get started and we'll go over the list of materials. Okay, the materials that you will need for this tutorial are a couple of plastic grocery bags. You're going to need a bunch of newspaper. You're going to need some crumbled up newspaper, a lot more than this. And you're also going to need newspaper strips already cut up. You're going to need some paper mache paste. Eventually, you're going to need some paper mache clay, masking tape, a box cutter or some sort of blade, cardboard toilet paper tube or paper towel tube, a marker of some sort. You're going to need a hot glue gun, hot glue sticks, and you'll need something to help you sculpt with and to smooth the paper mache. So you can use a spoon, you can use plastic spatulas or anything like that, nothing fancy. You will also need some paint brushes. I just have a few of them here on hand. One of the paint brushes you will need is definitely a 2-inch or 1-inch chip brush, and then you'll need some smaller paint brushes as well, and then a larger 2-inch one comes in handy. You're going to need some thin flexible cardboard commonly found in food packaging like cereal boxes and whatnot. You're going to need something to put your stuffed grocery bag on top of while you are strip macheing. I'm using a plastic bucket here. You're also going to need some paint. You're going to need white paint and black paint. I also use primer. The primer is optional, but you are definitely going to need some black paint and some white paint. Additional items that you will need, or additional materials that you will need to complete your project, is going to be a pair of scissors, some fine grain sandpaper, spray paint of any color of your choice, whether it be black, orange, purple. For Jack Skellington jack-o'-lanterns, I like to spray paint the insides of them purple, and then I insert a strand of LED, battery operated LED purple lights in there, and it glows really cool. And then to finish it off, to seal, if you're going to seal your Jack Skellington pumpkin, I suggest buying some sort of spar urethane. Get the clear satin. So if you're going to seal it, which I do suggest doing, you'll need that as well. Alright, first thing we're going to do here, we're going to take one of our plastic grocery bags and we're going to start stuffing it with newspaper. You're going to keep stuffing your grocery bag until you get it to the size of the Jack Skellington jack-o'-lantern that you desire. So the more newspaper you stuff in here, the bigger your sculpture or your armature for your sculpture eventually will be. Okay, so once you have your form to the desired size that you want to create your armature for your Jack Skellington pumpkin out of, and you got the air all squished out, go ahead and you're going to tie it off at the top here. Just like that. I like to tuck these ends into the bag just to kind of get them out of my way. And now you're going to take your second grocery bag. One thing that I want to point out is that plastic grocery bags are kind of actually square. So as you can see, this is kind of square. So what I want to do is I'm going to flip it around, and the end that is square like this, I'm going to do the opposite end on top of this. So I have a square end there, and the exact opposite angle for the square end on the second bag. You can do the same thing, tie it off real tight, just like that. Tuck the ends inside. And there you have it. So now with your masking tape, tear off a few pieces. And what I like to do is these ends that are that I've tied off, I just put a piece of masking tape across like that to hold it in place while I'm strip machining. Then I take these two ends and I kind of fold them in like that. Take another piece of masking tape and tie that off, or tape that off, so that that's not in the way when I'm strip machining. Alright, and there we have it. This will eventually be our Jack Skellington pumpkin. Alright, for this next phase, we're going to get into strip machining our grocery bag here that we have stuffed with newspaper. Now, your paper mache paste, the only thing that I use in this is a mixture of flour and water, and I get it to a very thin pancake batter. Some people like to put glue in there, and if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do that. I don't feel it's necessary. I used to add glue to my paper mache paste, but I have found that for the strip mache process, it really doesn't make a difference. Okay, basically this is what we're doing. We're just applying these newspaper strips, and we're going to continue from the center of the top down as far as it'll go on the bottom. We're going to do this all the way around, and you want to make sure that you get a good amount of layers of newspaper strips onto your form. I'm going to say at least 6 to 8 layers. More would be even better. The more layers of newspaper strips dipped in the paste that you put onto your form, the stronger your form is going to be once it is dry. Now, a little trick as a marker, once you have your first layer all the way across and overlap, starting from the center and working your way to the bottom. As a marker, what I like to do is find a couple of strips that are more distinctive, that are going to stand out from the rest of these strips, and I'm going to use that as my marker. So for instance, this right here, so that's going to be my marker. So once I have my second layer, my first layer is already on there. Once I come all the way around again, I'm going to know once I hit this marker that that's my second layer. And I'm going to continue to do that until I have 6 to 8 layers across the top portion of this. And then what I'll do after that, I will flip it over and start over from the other side doing the same process. So that's what you'll do for that step. Just making sure that you are getting 6 to 8 layers on the top portion, and flip it over and do the bottom portion as well. Okay, so I have flipped it over here and I'm continuing on the other side. I have 8 layers that I did on this side and flipping it over to continue here. Now, one thing that I did want to point out is that at this point there's a lot of paste that's on this structure, so you don't have to continuously dip your newspaper strips into the paste if it's that sticky. Just go ahead and lay on dry ones and that will work perfectly fine, because it will stick to all that paste that has accumulated on your grocery bag stuffed with newspaper. And if it starts getting a little dry again, then go ahead and dip your strips back into the paste. So for good measure, like I said, 6 to 8 layers on both sides. But for good measure, what I like to do is kind of turn it on its side like this, and just around the diameter of your form, go ahead and add 1 to 2 more layers on here. Once you have that done, you should be good to go. And then, as you can see, this is going to make a pretty good Jack Skellington jack-o'-lantern with the form that I have created here. So at this point, when it is completely macheed and you've done a good enough job, you're going to stick this either in front of a fan to dry or out in the sunlight. During the drying process, you do want to flip it so that both sides and all around it dry completely solid. You don't have to flip it every hour or whatever. You can leave this out in front of a fan or in the sun all day, and then at that point flip it over and let that sit and dry. This thing's probably, with the amount of strips on this and the paste, this thing's probably going to take at least in front of fans probably 2 days to dry, maybe a little bit longer. You don't want to continue with the next steps until your structure is absolutely dry. Alright, so that's it for this step, and we'll move on to the next. Okay, so once you have your stuffed bag here completely dry, the strip mache is completely dry, and if you've done a good enough job, it's going to be pretty solid too. You shouldn't have any soft spots, so I'm just checking for some soft spots, and this thing is pretty solid. So really at this point, what I want to determine is what's going to be the top, what's going to be the bottom here. I'm just kind of looking at it from all angles and trying to determine which part of this form is going to be best to draw in my Jack Skellington face. Flip it over. That's what I do. I kind of flip it over and look at it from all angles, and then you just kind of make your decision on what's going to be best for your structure. I'm going to put his face right here. It doesn't have a bunch of different ridges that I need to work around, so I'm going to go ahead and draw in his face there. But before I do that, I'm going to flip this over, and I need to cut the hole from the bottom because he is going to be hollow, and then remove the stuffing. So using my marker here, the way that I do this is I kind of find the center, I make a little dot, and then I just draw a line from the center, kind of like a compass type of a thing. That's what I like to do. So if you see that, And then I take my marker and I just, using those lines, my compass lines there as a guide, I draw in the circle around it. There you have it. Now, you're going to take your box cutter, or if you have a serrated knife will work really well for this too. And go ahead and you're going to cut all the way through and all the way around your circle. All right, once you have that cut all the way through, you remove that top, and you can see how thick that is from all the layers of newspaper strips that we applied with the strip mache process. At this point, guys, get your hot glue gun plugged in so that it's nice and hot and ready for our next steps here. All right, and then just using my scissors, I'm going to go in and I'm going to cut around that plastic bag. So that's basically what I'm doing now. I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to remove all the stuffing, and I'm just transferring my stuffing into another plastic grocery bag. And then when I'm ready to create another pumpkin form with the grocery bag, I already have that grocery bag stuffed. So you're going to make sure that you remove all the newspaper from inside your pumpkin form. Okay, now you've got all of that out of there, all the newspaper out of there. We need to go in and make sure that we remove the plastic bag completely. You don't want to have any plastic bag left in there. All right. Plastic bag is out. And that's the way it looks. See? No plastic bag, no newspaper. Now I'm just going back and I'm kind of looking at my pumpkin here, finding the area where I want to place Jack Skellington's face. Now this is the side that I wanted to put his face on here. And as you can see, it's a little lopsided. That will occasionally happen when you're cutting out the bottom of your circle. That is an easy fix though, because when we start to clay over on the bottom, we're going to add a bit more clay onto this side, and so it will sit evenly. So that's not something to be overly concerned about. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw in my eyes, the nose, and the mouth onto my Jack Skellington form here. Okay, so Jack Skellington has many different expressions on his, his eyes are very in his mouth. So you can draw in any expression on his face that you like. You could do the more round, just his round kind of eyes, or you can make the more kind of half moon type thing. Anything that you desire on what face you want to create is what you're going to go ahead with your marker and draw that in. What I like to do is determine where the center point is going to be on my Jack Skellington or any kind of pumpkin that I'm creating. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it this way so I could see it. I'm putting a little dot at the top here, and I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to put a line right through the center. So just like that. So from the center up here, that's where his stem is going to be for our Jack Skellington jack-o'-lantern. And then I've determined, like right down here, that's going to be the center. So I'll put an eye on this side, eye on that side, nostrils in the middle, and then the mouth. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and I'm going to draw in my Jack Skellington eyes here. I like to do on him, I think I want to do the more kind of angry Jack look. I kind of like that look for Jack Skellington. But you could go ahead and choose whatever you want. You could do, so as you can see, I drew in that eye here. It's more of the half circle, half moon type thing. Just like that. But you can go ahead and do whatever you want. And then you can try to make these symmetrical or make them a little off kilter, whatever you desire. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other eye here. I tend to not make, when I do Jack Skellington busts or jack-o'-lanterns, I kind of like to make one eye maybe a little bit higher than the other, or one eye a little smaller than the other. I think it gives him more of a interesting expression on his face. So as you can see, this one's slightly larger, and it's a bit higher. This one's slightly smaller and a bit lower. You can make them symmetrical, whatever you desire. And then keeping in mind Jack Skellington's nostrils, they're pretty basic. You know, they're basically these two little slits here, rounded type slits. They're not very big, so I'm going to go ahead and just draw a couple of those on, just like that. You can make them slanted, you can make them up and down, whatever you want to do. But there's my nostrils. So I have his two eyes, I have his nostrils, and then his mouth. Because this is a hollow jack-o'-lantern, and if you want to insert some lights into this thing after it's done, keep in mind that, if you want an open mouth so that light comes through, then you're going to draw in an open mouth. If you want just the line and no opening, and you just want light to show through his eyes and his nostrils here, then you won't cut that out. But I like to have mine a little bit open, and kind of a grin, not a big one. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw in his mouth here. Doesn't have to be completely symmetrical. If you want one side higher than the other, go ahead and make one side higher. I'm going to have his mouth, not a wide gaping mouth, but I want him to have enough of a mouth so that some light, when I insert the lights in, when this is done, light does come through his mouth. So there we go. I did make one side a little bit longer or higher than this side, but you get the idea. Now, as far as his little stitches, I don't even bother drawing them in. I'm just drawing them in so that you get an idea of what it's going to look like. I'm going to paint those in afterwards, after it's all clayed over. All right, so you've got your facial features of Jack Skellington on there. Next step, get your blade, and you're going to go ahead and cut out those features. So that's what I'm going to do now. Start with one side. Be very careful, obviously. Alright, and as you can see, there's one eye that's cut out. So you're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the other eye, with your nostrils here. And then the inside portion of your mouth, cut along those lines so that you can get that mouth out of there. Alright, nearly there. Got my mouth cut out here. Just like that. Alright, so 2 eyes, 2 nostril holes, and a mouth. Okay, next step, we need to get a stem on him. So you're going to want to take your toilet paper tube, find the center of your Jack Skellington on the top of him here, keeping in mind where your face has been drawn in. Take your marker, and right around the base, go around there. That's the area you're going to cut out. So go ahead and cut that out using your blade. Be very careful. This top part is probably going to be pretty thick, so take your time with that and get that thing cut out, and then we'll move on. And as I'm cutting this out, the top part here, it's still the top part here is still pretty moist inside there, not completely like wet, because it's very thick. But that's okay. That's not going to be a big deal, because that will dry and you won't have any issues with it. If you're concerned about that, put it back out into the sun and let it dry, or in front of a fan and let that dry. But again, that's going to dry completely fine and you're not going to have any issues. Alright, so now that you have that cut out, you're going to go ahead and insert your toilet paper tube inside your Jack Skellington here. What I like to do is I kind of look through his eyes here, because I don't want to see, when you're looking through the pumpkin or your jack-o'-lantern, you really don't want to see the tube when you look through there. So I'm trying to gauge where I kind of want that. So I'm looking through there and I'm not actually seeing the tube. So you want your tube to be in there at least a half an inch. That should be perfectly fine for something like this. So that's what I've determined. I've got that in there a half an inch. I can look through these eyes and I do not, from all angles, I don't see the cone from the tube from the inside of the eyes. And now you kind of want to determine how tall you want your stem. I don't want mine very tall, so I'm just going to go ahead and give him kind of a stumpy stem. So I'm going to make a mark here. That's where I'm going to cut the tube. And I'm also going to make a mark down here on the bottom on the tube. And that's going to give me an indication of how far I want the tube to be inserted into the actual structure. So that's what I've done there. And you take your tube and go ahead and cut it. All right. Don't worry if you don't get it completely round and symmetrical. That's not going to be a big deal. If you're worried about that, take your scissors like I'm doing and trim it down so that it's kind of even, or more even on each side. So I'm reinserting my tube to the line here. That tells me how far I want it to be down. And that's the first thing that I'm going to go ahead and hot glue. So if you got your hot glue gun ready to go, plugged in like I told you to, then you're going to be ready to move on real quick with this part. Go ahead and give it a healthy bead of hot glue all the way around the base of this tube here. And now once that is cool and dry, it's safe for you to go ahead, get your hot glue gun. We're going to attach the cap here to cap off the stem. So with the hot glue gun, I'm just going to go ahead and around the cardboard tube, I'm just putting a bead of hot glue around there. If you guys have watched some of my other tutorials, you will know that something that I always have on hand when I'm dealing with hot glue is a little cup of, as you can see, a bunch of hot glue, dried hot glue on there, is a little cup of cold water. That way, in case I have any accidents and I get any on my finger, I just dip my finger in the cold water and that saves you some pain. So once you have that glue around there, take your little cap. Now this is the cap that we used to cut out the center. You're going to take a portion of that. I like to flip it over so it's a little concave. And go ahead and stick that on there. While you have that stuck on there, very carefully take your hot glue gun and go ahead and put a bead of hot glue all the way around to where your cap connects to your cardboard tube. While that's drying, what you can do, get your thin flexible cardboard and you're going to start cutting some strips. We're going to use these strips to make our inserts for our eyes, nose, and mouth more three-dimensional when we go to clay over it. So you take your thin flexible cardboard and just cut some strips. Give yourself some room. I would say maybe, depend on how thick you want your three-dimensional look to it. That's how thick you're going to cut your cardboard pieces here. I usually do, something like that thick. I'm not measuring it, but you get the idea. So go ahead, cut a bunch of those strips because you're going to need them. And that's something you can be doing while you're waiting for your hot glue on your stem to dry so that you can handle your jack-o'-lantern form. We're ready to move on with starting to use our thin flexible cardboard and glue in to make the eyes more three-dimensional. So got your hot glue gun ready, you've got your strips of cardboard ready. And the way that I like to do it, I take a piece of cardboard here, thin flexible cardboard, and I kind of stick it in the opening of where I want to glue it. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this right about there. And I'm going to glue in one portion at a time. So I've got that lined up. I'm going to start from the corner of his eye here, go to about right there. So you go ahead and put a bead of, or a line of hot glue around your outer edge. And as you can see, I am applying the glue to the portion of the cardboard that has the glossy side to it. So make sure that you're applying the glue to the glossy side, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and very carefully, I'm going to stick that inside there. Just like that. I want that to be sticking out. Make sure that you do have your cup of cold water handy for this, because if you're going to get hot glue on you, this is going to be the stage where it's going to happen. It's going to give it that more three-dimensional look to it. So I'm going to go ahead and take another piece of my cardboard here, and I'm going to do the same here. I'm kind of manipulating the cardboard so that it does take on a rounder shape to it. I'm going to start from the corner of the eye. I'm going to go in here and kind of measuring where I need to cut it, so right about there. Like that. That's how I'm going to apply it. It's perfectly okay if you have a little bit of an overlap here where your two pieces of cardboard connect, because when we're after we're done claying over the whole form and it's dry, we're going to go in and take a little bit of clay and even out those insides where these pieces of cardboard have connected. So I'm going to go ahead and hot glue this piece into place as well. Just like that. You can see that. So that's what you're going to go ahead and do. You're going to do the same thing with your other eye hole, your nostrils, and then the mouth as well. Just a section at a time, go ahead and glue. Make sure that you're gluing it just on the edge there so that you have the cardboard sticking out a bit from your pumpkin form. At this point you have made your three-dimensional look to your inserts for your eyes with your flexible cardboard. One of the things that I like to do after I have it all in, I've got it in the eyes, the nose, the mouth, I will go back in with my hot glue, and on the outer end here I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of hot glue around all of the inserts that I just hot glued into place. That is going to make it a little bit more sturdy and also fill in any kind of gaps that may be around your cardboard inserts here. Alright, and then we're going to go ahead and let that cool and dry completely before we start handling this thing again. But I do want to point out that, of course, this is not perfect. As you can see, or maybe you can't see, there's a little bit of a gap here between my two pieces of cardboard insert. They don't directly connect. On this side, one of them is a little higher than the other, okay, as well as a piece here on one of the nostrils, and then down here you can see that one is higher than the other and I have little gaps. That's not going to be a big deal, okay? Now of course you're going to let your glue completely dry before you start handling this thing, but the way that you're going to fix those areas is by taking your pair of scissors, and I'll start over here, and I'm just going to trim that edge right there. So you see now they line up a little bit better. It doesn't have to be perfect, guys. Once you get the clay on there, it's going to be perfectly fine. But I'm just trimming just a tiny bit. And around here on the mouth part, you see, you're going to notice that when you're hot gluing a piece of cardboard on a half circle or a curve, you're going to have these areas where you get to the center and it's going to be sticking out in the center a little bit more than on the other side. So the way that you fix that to make it more even, take your scissors and just trim it around just like that. Do the bottom part. They don't have to be, again, they don't have to be completely, don't have to be perfect, because we're going to put clay around it and nobody's even going to know the difference once you're done. And we're also going to fill in these little gaps as well. So that's the point in our tutorial where we're at right now. We have all this in place. The next step is to go ahead, get your paper mache clay out, get your paper mache paste out with your 1-inch chip brush, and we're going to move on to, we're just going to go ahead and clay over the bottom portion of this jack-o'-lantern, and then we're going to sit that in front of fans so it can dry, and once that's dry we'll move on and we'll be able to clay over the rest of the sculpture, and we're going to be leaving the stem for last. Alright, so you have your paper mache clay. Now if you want to make your own clay, or you're interested, again, if you're interested in learning how to make our Scarecrow Joe Studio clay, we do have a tutorial for that on our channel, so check that out. We tend to make it in big batches because we make a lot of different art at the same time, so we use a lot of clay. You don't need to make it in a big batch like you see in our tutorial. You can use a hand mixer and mix up smaller batches. If you're only going to make like one or two things, I suggest that you actually get a pre-made paper mache clay that all you have to do is add water to it, and that's going to work perfectly fine if you're just doing like one or two of these things. So basically what we're going to do now is we're just going to go ahead and clay over the bottom of it. So I'm applying just on the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and apply a layer of clay. What I like to do is I like to get a ball of it like that, make a little pancake or a little clay patty like that, stick it on there like that. Doesn't matter how you do it as long as you get it all around the bottom of it. I'm doing this in a way that you guys could see it easily, but normally I would just put this thing in my lap and just clay around it that way. So basically just on the right around the perimeter of the bottom. You don't have to go all the way up to the top here, just around the bottom. Also, you want to make sure that you get in here around the edge of your cutout for your bottom hole. Stick some clay in there too, all the way around it, just like that. Do that whole thing. You're going to go all the way around, do the whole thing. Alright, so as you can see, I have my layer of clay just on the bottom. And as I mentioned earlier, that my form was a little lopsided, but as you can see now, it sits pretty flat. And the way that I fixed that, as I mentioned previously, is that on the side that needed a little bit more clay, I bulked that up, put more clay on there, so that when it dries, it will sit nice and even. We're going to take our paper mache paste with our 1-inch chip brush, paintbrush here, and we're going to smooth out this layer of clay that we put on the bottom by just brushing that on. And again, the paste that I'm using is nothing more than a mixture of flour and water to a very thin pancake batter type of a consistency. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just taking my brush here, dipping it in the paste, and smoothing out the clay by doing that. This is by far the easiest way to smooth out paper mache clay, in my opinion. You're going to make a quick work of this by using this technique instead of just trying to use some kind of a spoon or something to smooth it out without applying any paste onto it. So that's what you're going to do. You're just going to go ahead and use your paintbrush dipped in the paste, smooth that completely out. When you get to your edges, like here, make sure that you're smoothing it out to a degree where you're kind of feathering in that wet clay into the surface of your newspaper here, so that when we go to apply the rest of the clay on it, we don't have this big ridge that we need to cover. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then also you're going to want to make sure that you do the inside part here. And basically when I get to that part, I just kind of form it with my fingers. Make sure that I go in there and smooth that down with my fingers. So you're going to go ahead and continue on by smoothing out your clay just as I'm doing here. So as you can see, I've gone in and I've completely smoothed that out using the paste. And the other thing that I like to do, if you have any kind of, you know, sculpting tools such as these are just very, very basic little plastic sculpting tools. I like to go ahead and after I smooth it out with the paste, give it a once over, smooth it out even more using one of my little sculpting tools here. Now if you don't have anything like this, a plastic spoon works perfectly well. The rounded edge works perfectly well, as you can see, and you can use that and smooth out the entire bottom of your pumpkin after you've gone in with smoothing it with your paper mache paste with the paintbrush. So I'm going to go ahead and do this whole thing, and then that's going to be it for this part, because we're going to have to let it sit out and dry. Put it in front of fans, inverted like this. Obviously, if you have some sort of a bucket, like this, stick it inside the bucket like that. Sit it out in front of fans. Sit it out in front of fans so it can dry, or sit it out in the sun. Now, depending on how thick you do have your layer of clay on there, can take a day, can take a couple of days. This is I'm probably going to leave this sit and dry for at least a couple of days, because I did have to build up a thicker layer so that my pumpkin form sits evenly. So it's going to take probably a couple days for that to dry, and then after that, when it's completely dry, we're going to move on to sculpting the rest of the jack-o'-lantern.